Chapter 5. Old Elizabeth led me up the narrow staircase. The pain in my ankle dulled a little with each step, and my boot didn't pinch, so it must not have swollen much. When we reached the top, she pushed open the first of two doors. Its hinges creaked like an old man's knees. The light air squeezed between the window sash and sill. The smell of wood smoke on its edges. I shivered, but more from the heaviness of this place than from a cool bite of the air. A thin strip of moonlight through the glass lit the room enough for me to discern a bed against one wall, a dresser against the opposite one. The simplicity reminded me of home. I relaxed, chiding myself for taking on Sheriff Jeffrey's foreboding. Ollie remained with her back against the open door. "Is this your room?" I asked. She lifted one shoulder. "I slept in here before, but with Daddy gone, James likes us all together." She nodded towards the room next door and again brushed aside the lock of hair that fell across her eyes. "Before Daddy? James?" What didn't I know about Aunt Annabelle's life? I gritted my teeth, not sure how much to ask this child. Instead, I laid my hand on her thin shoulder and knelt down, my eyes even with hers. "I'm here now, honey. Everything's going to be fine." One corner of her mouth turned down. Didn't she believe me? "You go on to bed. I'll take care of things for a while." Her mouth opened as if to protest, then shut again before she scurried like a scared rabbit into the next room. I slid my suitcase next to the dresser and stared at the wall dividing one bedroom from the other. Aunt Annabelle obviously needed help. I knew I couldn't keep house and make the meals, but I'd never had sole responsibility for a child before. In fact, I'd rarely had any contact with children except for the younger students in school, but Ollie seemed quite capable. She'd obviously been taking care of things until now. Stepping back into the dark hall, I let my fingertips gaze the walls and guide me back to the staircase and down again. I needed to ask the sheriff some questions before he left. Curls tickled my face as my shoes thudded unevenly towards the lit room. I stood blinking into the brightness. "Here she is, Annabelle." The sheriff's voice held a tenderness that surprised me. My eyes adjusted to the light, my nose to the overwhelming scent of camphor and mint. Sheriff Jeffries stood beside the bed, holding my aunt's small hand. I studied the face staring at me from under a mound of quilts. It didn't hold any resemblance to my memory of Aunt Annabelle. No rosy cheeks or shiny eyes. Her skin looked taut against her bones, not soft and full as I remembered. I tried to hold back a gasp, but it half escaped into the quietness of the room. Sheriff Jeffries' head jerked up. He stared at me as if my panicked thoughts had run loose into the room. Then he softened again, signaling that I should take the chair next to the bed. I did as he bade, but I'm sure my eyes resembled lily pads on a pond when I looked back at him. Mama had always kept me out of the sick room. She nursed Will and Daddy and me all on her own. I would ask the sheriff to stay, but he couldn't stay, not all night, not without a chaperone in the house. His gaze locked on mine. "You're in good hands now, Annabelle." I gave my head a slight shake. My hands weren't good. They were young, inexperienced, immature, and this didn't look like flu symptoms I'd seen. Aunt Annabelle appeared seriously ill, with her sunken dark eyes and pale face. I didn't know how to take care of someone so sick. Sheriff Jeffries only nodded. "Doc Risner will come again as soon as he can." "Thank you," came the croak from the bed. A rasping intake of breath followed before the word sheriff found its way out of her mouth. He stood. I did the same, following him to the door. Water's in the basin, he said to me. Keep cool rags on her skin. Who? I swallowed down the lump in my throat. Who is Ollie? Am I to care for her too? He rubbed a hand down his face. Annabelle's been caring for Ollie, Elizabeth, and her brothers and sisters since their mother passed. With their daddy off fighting the Germans, they needed someone. I tried to comprehend his meaning. Brothers? Sisters? Did they have no one else? I'll be back tomorrow, okay? He settled his hat on his head and left before I could find my voice to protest. Watching the room empty of him was like watching the rope slither down the water well into oblivion. Only the plunk of the bucket indicating the bottom had been reached. My plunk came in the form of another rattling breath from the bedside beside me. I forced myself to smile into my aunt's face. Remembering the rags and cool water, I dipped a dry square of cloth in the basin, then wrung out the water before dabbing it on my aunt's forehead. I expect you don't recognize me, Aunt Annabelle. I'm Rebecca. My mama, your sister, sent me to look after you. Hearing my own voice calmed my nerves. A spasm of coughs shook her. I stepped back from the bed, the rag limp in my hand, until the coughing quieted. She held out her hand to me. I returned to the bedside, my stomach boiling with panic. Beautiful, she whispered. What did she mean? Won't be long now. Slow words, tired words. Don't worry, Aunt Annabelle. I pulled the cool cloth down her hot cheek. I'm here now. You'll be up and around in no time, I promise. My voice sounded far more confident than I felt. I dozed in the chair, startling awake in intervals, sometimes to silence, sometimes to my aunt's moans. Each time I'd rub the sleep from my face and reach for another rag to baptize her feverish head in cool water. Aunt Annabelle's skin appeared darker near morning, or perhaps the light waned. Instead, I peered at the kerosene lamp on the bedside table, but its clear bowl showed plenty of fuel, and its flame blazed on a trimmed wick. I touched another wet rag to her face. My fingertips warmed as if I touched bread fresh from the oven. If only Mama had let me watch her healing hands at work over those she loved. But she hadn't, so I carried on with only what the sheriff's instructions as my guide. He promised the doctor would come, but when? With shaking hands, I gathered my unruly hair, trying to pin the wildest strands into their proper places. Then I attempted to smooth the front of my skirt and fabric, now as wrinkled as an old woman's hands. As the outside darkness muted to gray, dark spots, almost purple streaks, my aunt's ashen cheeks. Was that normal with a fever? Then a crimson light trickled from her mouth to her chin. It touched the white edge of the top quilt and spread into a blood-red stain. My heart nearly stopped. I jumped from my chair and wiped her chin clear before inching away from the bed and the blood. As uninformed as I was, I knew this did not portray good. My back hit the solid wall. I slid toward the floor, gathering my knees to my chest. Rattling, gasping breaths filled the room, filled my ears. I longed to run away, to listen instead to the rustle of the wind through the trees or the ripple of the water over a cluster of stones. I hadn't anticipated this. I'd only focused on escaping the farm and fighting an adventure. Sometime after dawn, Ollie stood at my side, blonde hair matted, eyes swimming with tears that didn't fall. She reached her thin arms around my neck and laid her cheek on my head. Relief tumbled over me as I closed my arms around her. We held each other for only a moment before I stood on tingling legs and took Ollie's hand in mine. We moved back to the chair near the bed. I pulled Ollie onto my lap. She reached for Aunt Annabelle's hand and held it between her two small ones. I dabbed a damp cloth against the blood now coating my aunt's chin. Aunt Annabelle moaned, long and low, a weak cough, shaking her whole body and spilling more bright blood onto her covering, this time streaming from her nose too. Ollie didn't flinch as I reached across to clean my aunt's face. She only brought the waxen hand to her small lips, kissed it, and tucked it back beneath the quilt's edge. Muted thumps sounded overhead. I looked up as if I could see through the ceiling. I ran my tongue over my dry lips. Ollie slid from my lap. I'll get them. She straightened her shoulders. I put the oats in to soak last night. My mama taught me how to make oatmeal before Janie? Her small body bent slightly downward, like a sapling in a moderate wind, as she left the room without another word. What was I doing here? Someone else should be in charge. Mama, the doctor, the sheriff, not me. Help me, Lord. My whispered words fluttered the stillness. Words I didn't want Ollie to hear, but needed in my own ears. Aunt Annabelle tried to breathe, her head turning toward me. The children, please. Blood gurgled from her mouth around the words. One red spot dripped onto my hand. I stared at the crimson splotch. My aunt's blood on my hand, the same blood running beneath our skin. Mama had long ago abandoned her sister. I couldn't do the same. Pushing back sweet, slick hair near her temple, I leaned close, breathing out my words near her ear. I'll take care of them, Aunt Annabelle, I promise. My aunt fought to pull in another breath. There's no one else. She coughed out another flow of blood as my eyes filled with tears. I don't know if God sent you. Her words rattled out with the haven as her spirit pushed free of her body, and unadapted silence covered the room. And that was chapter 5. I'll see you next week for chapter 6.